Welcome to Shut Up and Say Something. I am your host and creator of the show, Deedre Daniel. This podcast is all about how to live a fascinating life, and we're learning how to do that one interesting conversation at a time. We try to stay away from discussing politics, religion, and the ad nauseum topic du jour, but anything else is fair game. And today I am speaking with Trent Modglin. Trent is the publisher of several magazines, the Real Park Ridge, Illinois Brewing, and the Real Chicago, which is also on hiatus right now, but we'll get into that a little bit more later. He is the former senior editor at Pro Football Weekly, and he is a proud Florida State alum who still gets a little more nervous on football Saturdays than he probably should. And he's also a semi-patient herder of cats, because he coaches a third grade flag football and basketball team so that he can spend more time with his cute son, Owen. And I met Trent when I was going to school at Florida State University. His best friend and fraternity brother was dating one of my sorority sisters, so we ran into the same social circles. And Trent, did you know that even though I dropped out of Florida State, I'm actually considered an alum?
Well, when you stay there for 8 years, the alumni status kind of comes with the territory, doesn't it?
I think that record goes to Bert Kreischer.
Yeah, that's true. He was actually just on stage here. I missed him last week.
Oh, you did? Oh,
yeah, I wanted to go see his show and I couldn't make it. I was a little bummed.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, I would love to see him live. I wasn't there for 8 years. I was only there for 5.
I know, but it's, with the amount of money spent in bars, sometimes it feels like 8 when it's really 4 or 5. I was there 5 years too, but I had 2 degrees to show for it.
Oh, nice.
Oh,
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Nice little jab there. No, so do you know the story, how I'm actually an alum? The legit story?
Did they like an honorary degree? Did you go back?
No, it's not an honorary degree.
Yeah.
Okay. So the year 2000, I was working at Geico. I was in the customer service department in a call center, and there were hundreds of people there. I felt like a prairie dog just in these cubicles, and I'd peer over the walls looking around at everyone else that wasn't tethered to their desk. And one day I sign off on break and I march into the manager's office, and her name's B. And I said, B, my name is Deedre Daniel. What does it take to get promoted around here? She was a little stunned, and she said, well, do you have a degree? And I said, no, I went to Florida State University, and then I dropped out to be an actress or writer, and then I just never quite, and then I realized that's not the way to pitch why you should be promoted, that story. And so I just sort of trailed off, and she says to me, well, you have to have a degree. And I said, and what? And she says, business. And I said, oh, okay. What else? And she said, well, people need to know who you are. You got to sell yourself. You need to be in a committee or something. And I said, that's it? She goes, yeah, that's pretty much it. And so I walked out of her office deflated. I don't know if it's because I watched The Muppets Take Manhattan, where they walked in and said, we would like to be rich and famous. So like, well, let's break out the rich and famous contract. So I obviously didn't get promoted right then. And so I marched back to my desk, and my supervisor runs up to me. She was like, what were you doing in the manager's office? And I said, I was asking how to get promoted around here. And she's like, what did she say? And I run through the spiel, and she goes, oh, well, there's a committee that you could join about like different ideas you might have to improve business, strategy and all that. And I said, all right, I'll join it. And so then the next day I went to Florida Southern College, and I asked if I could enroll in classes. And they said, well, you're going to need to take English and math and all these other basic classes that I had already taken at Florida State. Yeah. And I said,
a few years earlier.
Right. I said, I already took those classes. And they said, well, you don't have a degree from Florida State, so you have to take those classes again with us. And I said, but if I came here with an AA from a community college, you wouldn't make them take math and English and all that. And I'm like, well, that's because it's an AA. It's an associate's degree, but you don't have that. I was like, okay. So little deflated. I go home, I'm brushing my teeth, and that's when all the best ideas happen, right? Yep. And I call Florida State University the next day, and I said, I have all these courses, all these classes I've taken with you. Can I get an AA? And they said, we're a 4-year institution. We offer bachelor's degrees and above. I said, I know, but could you ask someone for me? And they said, yeah, all right, well, we'll look into it. And sure enough, someone approved it. And I have on my wall over there.
Got mailed out.
Yeah, it says, I am an alum of the Florida State University Associate of Arts. So I went back to Florida Southern College. I was like, I got an AA from a 4-year institution. And so they would not force me to take their math and English and science and all that kind of stuff again. So yeah, there you go.
Skip right over geography 101 and trigonometry, right?
Yeah.
Thank God.
So now I get all the little mailers and all that. Being an alum of Florida State.
Yeah, well, tug at your heartstrings a little bit too. Remind you of the good old days.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So I'm having Trent on today because I've known him for almost 3 decades, and that man is always out and about doing something. I mean, he's at the concert, he's at the sporting events, he's at the festivals, he's at the restaurant openings, he's at the beer tastings, the Broadway shows, the snowy Alps, the cabin in the mountains. He's on the sailboat, the island vacation, the impromptu weekend trip to the city. And we're going to discuss how he affords this rock and roll lifestyle.
On a journalism,
on a journalism salary, right? And he probably has a story or two to share. So there you go. That's why Trent's on today. Welcome, Trent.
Hey, I'm glad to be associated with anything that's labeled as fascinating, because I've listened to your podcast and seen a lot of your guests, and it feels like it's a virtual who's who. So I'm honored to be part of it.
Oh, I was telling a couple of people about you and they said, oh, I can't wait to listen to that episode, because everyone wants to travel more. Everyone wants to get out and about and do more, but it's the finances that usually holds people back, finances and time. And you've managed to find both for decades. So that's definitely something I want to talk about. But before we dive into that, I want to talk about this magazine publishing, because I know a lot of people would like to be a publisher and they don't even know how to even get into that industry at all. So if you could talk a little bit about your journey there, that would be great.
Yeah, I come from a kind of a family of entrepreneurs. Everybody kind of enjoys doing their own thing. And going back to my grandpa and my dad and my brother, and I don't want to say that nobody likes working for the man, but maybe just working for the man a little bit and then kind of venturing off on our own. My dad has done everything from start a golf course to start a travel agency and get self-employed in real estate, which is, covered him for most of his life. And my brother hand carves wood pool tables. In fact, a few celebrities have purchased them, and they're just little shameless plug, aspenrustic.com. And he's really talented. And I had started off covering all the sports teams at Florida State and was the editor of the school paper and doing some freelance stuff for various, the Tampa Tribune and Daytona Beach News Journal, and where they would basically hire me as a stringer to cover the sports, the different games and practices and things like that, where they couldn't send a full-time reporter. And so that was my little side gig. It was fun because you really got to know the athletes. You kind of got in with the coaches a little bit, and it just was a easy way to create better content, get good interviews and quality information out there. And that translated into a job with Pro Football Weekly. I moved back to Illinois in '99 and started a job with Pro Football Weekly as a reporter and writer. And we did a lot of radio and TV work as well, but it was a weekly magazine for, 4 or 5 generations, covering the NFL. And it was a lot of fun. I could say this now, it didn't pay very well, but all my friends were jealous of the job. So it's like a little bit of give and take there.
Right.
I'd be out with friends on a weekend or something like that. And they said, oh, who'd you talk to? I said, well, I interviewed Peyton Manning on Thursday. I said, wait, what? I was in a cubicle on Thursday. I was teaching algebra to, nosy high school kids. And so that was great. My Rolodex was fun. It was definitely a fun job. It was about 6 or 7 years into my Pro Football Weekly experience when the itch kind of took over, and I launched The Real Chicago. It was basically kind of a way for my friends and I to get free beer on the weekends. When I'd write about a certain bar or restaurant or festival, interview bands, that was kind of geared toward like the 20 to 40-year-old active Chicagoan. So I did that on the side, and I would actually deliver it. God bless my then girlfriend, now wife, because she would drive my Toyota Camry from block to block. It was like, remember the game Paperboy, and you'd throw the little newspapers up on that might be dating ourselves, but and that's kind of similar to what it was like. And she would be talking on the phone with her friends and pull up every block, and I'd be delivering the magazine out of the back of my car to coffee shops and bars and theaters. And I did that for 3 years, just kind of as a part-time gig, just for fun I don't know how I had time for it. But there was a moment where I was at an event and I had three different friends in the hospitality industry, and they all cornered me and they said, we've been thinking about this. And if you could take this glossy and make it a little bit bigger, make it a little bit more tourism focused, we would take 1,200 of them in our lobbies or our rooms. And that's kind of when like a light went on. It's one of those like little aha moments. And next thing you know, about a year later, I was in 72 hotels and distributed not only just to the little neighborhood spots, but also all the main hotels and everything that's out there. And
I remember seeing those magazines in the
yeah,
hotels when I would fly into Chicago on business. Yeah.
the distribution was interesting. I got to know hotel lobbies and concierge and everybody really, really well. And so I published The Real Chicago for 14 years. And only recently, like at the start of the pandemic, when all these hotels shut down and all my distribution points were gone, we had just moved after 20 years in the city. We had just moved to a really close suburb called Park Ridge. And the friends that live in Park Ridge who were recruiting us out to the burbs were like, well, we've been in The Real Chicago, we've been to your events and love the magazine. Why don't you start The Real Park Ridge? And at first I kind of laughed it off and I was like, well, wait a second. We're under lock and key here. All of a sudden we were wearing masks to the grocery stores and hunkered down. And so it made perfect sense to look into it, and it blossomed from there. And The Real Park Ridge is now distributed to almost every home in this general area, as well as over 100 businesses. So everything from restaurants and dentist offices and movie theaters, you name it, you can grab the magazine. It's a family-friendly entertainment magazine, just telling people kind of where to go, what to do. A lot of it's food related and kids and families, but it's wide ranging and fun. And I did not anticipate it going where it went. And so I still own The Real Chicago. I'm still debating on what to do with it because it was an established name for quite a while and I don't want to let it die, but it's one of those transitionary things where you got to kind of pick and choose your spots.
Right. Well, could you sell it?
Yeah. I mean, potentially it was a two-man operation. It just got to be the right fit because it's my face and my name that a lot of people have associated with it over the years. And just want to make sure when you do sell it, people have the right, the mentality for it and the right attitude that they're going to take it to the right spot.
Did it generate a lot of ad revenue for you?
Yeah, it's a free publication. So I had zero sales experience coming in. I was the creator. I was the writer. I enjoyed, the content, taking a magazine from 0 to 48 pages. And in doing so, that was the fun part. I sold because I had to. I sold because, especially when I left that salary behind with the football magazine, there's that remove the safety net. And it's a big jump. I remember I was out and I was selling, and I still was at the football magazine, but I'm trying to sell people on this idea that doesn't exist. So imagine you take a magazine in there, it looks good, and you can show them where they're going to be, what we're going to write about them. That's one thing. Now you take in your bare hands and you don't have a product to show them. You're selling them on yourself and your ideas. And I had been shot down left and right. It was embarrassing. And it's like, maybe this isn't what I should be doing. Maybe I have to, bite the bullet, create a magazine on the side and then sell it after that and just suck it up and take a loss for the first couple issues to show people what I can do. And I remember I went into a bar called Matilda in Chicago's Lakeview neighborhood. And we'd been in there a bunch. And I walked in, the owner was there and they hadn't opened yet. It was like, 4:45 or something like that. And I think he came over and locked the door for me. And I walk in, I sit down and he's like, well, tell me about your magazine. And already he had made more eye contact with me than the previous 27 people I've met with. And he sits down and like, tell me about it. And for 5 or 10 minutes, I told him my idea. And at that point I was just like, whatever. It was probably the worst sales pitch out of the 27 I had done before. And at the end, when I stopped talking, he says, Trent, I really like what you're talking about. Let me go get my checkbook. And it was like the lights from the angels, like, just kind of strange. And I was like, wait. And I was like, I didn't know what to do with myself because I just sold an ad. And I was in my 20s and I was like, wait, maybe I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but maybe if I take the more calm, relaxed, less sales pitch approach, a casual kind of conversation, that's the idea behind all this. And he was an advertiser for all, 13, 14 years that I published the magazine. And we had New Year's Eve events there and wine tastings and all kinds of stuff. He became a really good friend. So it was like this, again, those certain moments where you're like, okay, well, maybe this is something that we can actually take and grow.
Well, and you never forget the first customer. You never
Never
do.
forget the first anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was he was fantastic. And it wasn't even that. I mean, it was an ad that was like, I don't know, a few $100 a month. It could have been gone in one steak at Gibson's downtown.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that he believed in what I was saying and he liked the ideas. And he wasn't a big business either. That was a commitment for him.
Sure. And did that give you the confidence to keep pushing forward?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it was weird because right after that, like a couple other things, I took this more, a little bit different approach going into these sales meetings and these, sit downs where I was talking to them, not like they were a potential client, but like, hey, let's develop this real relationship where I'm going to show you the residual value that I can bring with the magazine. And it's not just, that old timey newspaper ad salesman, the old guy in a three-piece suit out there.
What can I do to get you in this car today?
Yeah. Selling vacuum repair door to door.
Yeah.
So it opened up a few other ideas and made things, I don't want to say it made things easier, but it definitely snowballed from there and made me realize that there's potential to make this a full-time thing.
So your magazine completely explodes. It goes into 72 hotels in downtown Chicago, and then boom, COVID, no one's staying in hotels. And what were you thinking?
I don't know if I can say it on this podcast, but I was thinking,
say it anything you want.
I was thinking, oh shit. I had been doing it for, in hotels full-time for about 10 years. So it was pretty successful. I had some really good advertising base and widespread, both in distribution and readership. And when COVID hit, we had moved to Park Ridge. And so it was already a little bit more of a challenge not being right in, even though we're close to the city, it's not being right in the city and right in the mix of everything. But the uncertainty of, especially the distribution points. And then also, hey, this restaurant or this museum is not having anybody come in for 2 months, 4 months. And we didn't know how long it was going to last.
Right.
So all of a sudden their advertising budget is gone.
Yeah.
So, and they don't know what it's going to look like on the other end. And so it created this, as we all know, this kind of worldwide uncertainty, but especially in the publishing industry, but never got hit as hard as restaurants or the tourism industry. But it was pretty tough because a lot of companies came out and they had a ton of money to spend originally. And all of a sudden, some of the museums that would willingly take out a full page ad were all of a sudden at 20% capacity.
I'm going to ask you a nosy question. How much does it cost to start a magazine?
Ooh, that is a good question. It depends on the scope of the magazine, I would say, and kind of where you want to distribute it to. The biggest cost recently has been the dramatic increase in paper pricing. Even before like this inflation kind of took a stranglehold on the country, paper has tripled in price in the last 2 years. Ooh. And so imagine what that would do to a margin where you're used to making X amount and now it's 40 or 50% of that just because of paper. But at the same time, you can't reduce the readership. You can't reduce the distribution or the circulation because you've been growing it to a certain point. You want it to really encapsulate the whole area. And so it's a nonstop battle, and you can't be raising prices on people that, whether it's a beer magazine with tap rooms that have been closed for the better part of a year or restaurants or chiropractors, whatever, you can't be raising prices on them, even though all the other prices in your life and your livelihood are going up.
Okay, so that didn't totally answer the question. So let's say I want to start a magazine that's 10 pages.
That's more of like that's a pamphlet.
Is it a pamphlet? All right. What's a decent size magazine?
No, I'm kidding. I have my two are 48 pages and 64 pages, but they're also quarterly. So you got to decide like how often you want it to come out. Mine are quarterly because it's easier to produce more magazines fewer times a year than a bunch of magazines 12 times a year.
I see.
So it's much more affordable to produce. Like once they print that first couple pages, it's just all paper and ink from that point.
Yeah.
It's the expensive part is getting it on the printer.
The setup.
The setup of it and everything like that. So that's the more expensive part. But it really depends on where you want to distribute it, how many you want to print and things like that. But I mean, realistically, if you could get off the ground, if you weren't worried about paying yourself or and you had a new iPhone and you could take some photos on your own and not hire a professional photography service, anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 would probably do the try. I know it's a wide range, but
Hmm.
there's so many different magazines out there. You got to include obviously website and digital component to that. So
Yeah. Okay.
I want to make these magazines as big as possible and grow the social media and have this more vibrant lifestyle with the magazines. But there's certain ways you have to be cautious. So you got to spend money to make money and throw it out there and try and grow. But sometimes finding a little bit more creative, a little bit more organic way to do that and not spend the money and learn. I'll give you an example. I've learned to design my own WordPress sites, take a couple online classes. I had somebody build the skeleton of my websites, but now that's something I do rather than to pay somebody $75 an hour to update things when I can do it at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
watching Sports Center. So
How did you teach yourself how to build a website? Where'd you go?
I relied on GoDaddy a lot, and there's a lot of different tutorials and things out there that are very easy. I feel like I've always been pretty tech savvy, but I know where my limits are.
Mm.
And so I've hired a friend who's a consultant, and his guy kind of outsourced it, set the skeleton up of the website exactly how I wanted it. And then I come in and add the content and get things moving. I think the biggest thing, especially for entrepreneurs of any age, is know your limits. That's a big thing, is know where your strengths are, but also know where to hire the professionals and also know where to cut the professionals off. Like, hey, okay, thanks for getting to this point. Now I can take over
Hmm.
and really move things to the next level and have it be on me instead of sending out an invoice for money that you don't have.
Right. I know a lot of people make mistakes when they start pulling in money from their business. They pay themselves
No, no,
and
no.
right away instead of
Yep.
investing more in the business. And then back to your point, then you might be investing in the wrong things. So you want to pay people to do the things that you really can't do. Otherwise, figure out how to do it.
I remember when I started the Real Park Ridge and like the ads kind of started to flow in. And I was like, oh boy, the idea is like, okay, let's set aside a salary for myself. But then you realize that really prohibits how you can grow in other areas. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I would like a little bit of a level of caution, maybe just to be patient with how you spend money and do it as if you don't have that safety net. You've got 3 to 6 months to really produce something nice and something that you're proud of. Like, how can I get there without overspending, without putting myself at risk?
Hmm. So you started off with the Real Chicago, you move it over into this local publication, and then where did Illinois Brewing come about? Or how did Illinois Brewing come about?
Two craft beer geeks, myself and my art director, who has been with me since the football magazine days, and on through the Real Chicago and the Real Park Ridge. And he and I just had this idea, and we looked around, and there was a few other states that we saw where they had a brewing magazine, and we knew how big the industry had gotten and how many breweries were out there. And like nobody really tells their story or does it well. And but we'd seen a few other states that had it nearby, and we're like, boy, Illinois does not. And I was friends with the PR director who does some third-party PR work, and I worked with her on some events, and I pitched her the idea of doing this Illinois Brewing. And the Illinois Craft Brewers Guild is like basically the chamber of commerce for 300 breweries in Illinois.
Hmm.
And she said, wait till we come out of COVID, wait till people actually have something to sell again and are welcoming everybody back into the tap room. And as soon as the new director took over for the guild, she's like, okay, are you ready? Let's go, let's go. And he was a big marketing guy, and he understood the value of the magazine and potential sponsorship. So that was a big factor. And when everybody started to open, I pitched the idea. The guild loved it, and we put out our first issue September 1st of Illinois Brewing. And illinoisbrewing.com is the website. From there, you can flip through a digital magazine there as well that you can see. And it's been a big success, and like a lot of great feedback. Brewery owners are just glad to have this marketing arm for the guild in a sense, but we also are, I mean, a magazine about beer, it sounds kind of boring to maybe 40% of the population, but our job is to really have this creative content, make it fun and easy to read. But there's a lot of stories to tell too, with people's history in brewing and all the innovation and exciting things that are happening in the industry, because it is a growing market, and I don't see it going anywhere.
It almost seems a little saturated, though. It seems like there's a brewery everywhere. So is there really room for everybody?
Yeah, that's a excellent question, because I feel like I blinked, even though it was really a 10, 12, maybe even 15-year process for the industry to get to the level it's at now. It seemed like it happened in 2 months.
Hmm.
You blinked and there was craft breweries everywhere. So that's one of the things that surprised me in putting this first issue out and really getting to know so many Illinois brewers and head brewers, brewery owners. There's this like real sense of camaraderie. It's almost like a fraternity of sorts. I thought it'd be this cutthroat business where everybody's out for themselves, because Illinois just crossed over 300 breweries last spring.
Wow.
In Illinois alone. And then you could take, Colorado and Oregon and Michigan and North Carolina, and they've got 500 each or more. So it's a huge, huge thing. But the camaraderie, the community aspect, so many of them give back to the communities they're in. They do charity events. They help each other out. Our cover story, in fact, is an article about two breweries, Twisted Hippo and Skeleton Key, cool names.
Yeah.
One of them had a fire and burned to the ground middle of the night. The other one had a tornado rip through and destroy a good portion of the brewery in the middle of the night.
Oh,
and
sad.
this whole brewery community in the guild, everybody rallied around them. They helped them sell their beer. They moved all their ingredients and saved a lot of time and money. And they held huge events and the fundraising things to keep their staff employed during the rebuild. And of course, it was a lot of it was at the tail end of the pandemic too. So it's been eye-opening, I would say, to see that everybody really is so supportive of one another. And there's just this sense that there's enough to go around for everybody, and why not help each other, because everybody's doing good things.
At the same time, I'm sure the large companies, the big corporations like Anheuser-Busch and all that, I'm sure they hate this.
It's kind of interesting, and people don't want to go on the record with it, and they roll their eyes or whatever. But when a big company like an Anheuser-Busch comes in and buys these craft breweries because they really like what they're doing, and it's viewed as kind of almost like a sellout kind of thing. You've sold out to the industry or everything that we believe in. But I look at it a little bit differently. I know Goose Island here was one of the real innovators in the craft beer industry in all of the United States. But they were huge in Chicago and sold to Anheuser-Busch, probably, I forget what year it was. But there were all these kind of grumblings among my friends, and, it's never going to be the same and everything. But in reality, now my friends in Fort Lauderdale and my friends in Seattle can drink Goose Island and all their different beers, and the quality hasn't changed. And so there's a little bit of a mix. I get where some people are coming from, where the idea that, it's just not it's not pure anymore. We've sold out to the man or the big corporations. But at the same time, if they can increase production and increase the visibility of really good beer, what's wrong with that?
Well, I know a lot of large corporations have a hard time innovating. Innovation requires mistakes, lots and lots of mistakes. And if you have to have multiple committee meetings and everyone else weighing in on it, and no one wants to own up when they made a mistake, then innovation really can't thrive. So for a lot of these large corporations, they're just not going to allow for bad beer to happen so that the good stuff can rise to the top. But I do wonder, go ahead.
Oh, you're also mass producing, so you really don't have time for mistakes, right? If you create a small batch farmhouse ale and something's not quite right, all you got to do is tweak the next batch. If you're a small craft brewer, okay, well, let's tweak the next batch. Worst case scenario is we produced a few kegs that didn't measure up to what we were hoping for. Well, Goose Island doesn't have that luxury. Like they have these huge facilities and all these other larger, the Lagunitas of the world, where they have to make sure it's just right. And so, the fear is naturally that you lose a little bit of the creativity, you lose a little bit of the fun, innovative recipes where they're just churning out what they think people will drink in mass quantities.
So there's glass shortages and CO2 shortages. What are people doing to innovate to stay ahead of that?
It's not that there's like a necessarily glass shortage, it's getting your hands on the glass. The shipping issues, going back to distribution and transportation issues that you see across other businesses as well.
Are they putting the beer in a different container then?
One of the things that they're doing a lot more of now is it's called crowlers and growlers.
Yeah.
Where you have your own 64-inch, it's like that old milk jug, right? And you're playing music on it and blowing into it and making noise.
Yeah.
And you have those at home and you can take those in. It's much more sustainable, obviously, for the environment. You're not hoping that 4-pack or 8-pack makes it to the recycling center. Where you're just taking in the big glass and filling it up there. And then it's a big deal in the industry too, as well, is the freshness of the beer, how quickly you can drink it from the time it was kegged to the time it's in your pint glass. The crowlers and growlers that are filled right there on the spot when you're in the brewery is a big deal. And it's more affordable, not only for the breweries, but for the consumer as well. You might have to help me come up with a better name. It's breweries and bunches.
Mhm.
I'm way more creative than that, but it's a thing
All right,
where
hold on. Brewery. First off, I can't say brewery. It's one of the words I struggle with. I sound
yeah,
like a
try it again.
schnauzer. Well, I just like a schnauzer trying to talk to a human, like brewery. I can't do it. So I apologize to the listeners. I
It's like
might
you're
have to.
taking the old Run DMC. You're taking the record and spinning a little bit.
So, totally. But where does the bunches come into play? I don't understand that part.
Chicago, the suburbs, probably represents 80% of the breweries in Illinois. So a lot of these suburbs, you would think one brewery would be enough. Well, there's 4 or 5 breweries in certain suburbs, and Chicago has almost 100. It's one of the biggest beer cities in the world. There's
Mhm.
like about 100 breweries in Chicago alone. But what's cool is that they have certain neighborhoods, like the Ravenswood neighborhood might have 5 or 6 breweries, and they have festivals together during the summer. And so they all come and serve their beer, and they share everything, and there's food trucks, and you're really celebrating the beer industry. And so the brews and bunches is an idea that where we'll pick a certain area of Chicago or a certain suburb, or even downstate and say Springfield or Decatur, where there's a certain number of breweries, and we'll do a feature on all 5 that are there. And so going back to the CO2 decline, which I don't really, I understand, but it's kind of beyond my comprehension to some extent, is we were really looking forward to going to this brewery. They make great barbecue, family friendly, all this stuff. And as we're walking in, they're forcing like a huge group out. They're like, yeah, sorry guys, it's closed. I thought there was an event going on. And they put up a sign and it says, apologize, we're out of CO2. Don't feel comfortable serving our beer. I don't think I've been denied entry into a bar very often. And it certainly hasn't been for CO2 shortages.
We don't have bubbles.
No, we don't have bubbles. And therefore the beer is going to taste like London in 1920.
Right.
A little flat, little warm.
Guinness doesn't really have a lot of
no
effervescence.
So if they had Guinness on tap, they probably would have stayed open.
Yeah. Have they tried to make other types of beverages that perhaps don't need as much CO2? Are you seeing innovation?
Yeah, a little bit. In fact, just the other night, I had a really good, they call it an English pub ale, and it's made out of a cask, like a wooden cask. Mm-hmm. And so they remember you ever see those old fashioned, like it's a pump at certain breweries, especially in Europe. And that doesn't rely hardly on any CO2 because it's not in a keg and it's not forcing. That's why it takes so long for the beer to be poured, is you're basically pumping pressure through from a cask into your glass. Mm. And so I think those are making a comeback a little bit. And one of the interesting things I was just reading up on, it's called Go Brewing here in the suburbs. And they're just launching, and I was going to say non-alcoholic beer, but it's an entire brewery and almost all their ABV, which is the alcohol content, is under 1%. And the owners just said they were tired of waking up with hangovers or feeling fully functional the next day. And they wanted to have the social aspect of going out for beers, but being able to, not call an Uber and have a good time the next day. And so that's an interesting thing too. I haven't seen too much of that, but it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
A lot of people that are moving to a more sober lifestyle.
That's true. And the phrase that they use in the industry is called sessionable, like session beers, where you can, I don't know if it comes from this, but my idea is like you have a full drinking session. You can sit back and not be afraid of these 12% bourbon barrel aged stouts that have as many calories as 2 Big Macs.
Yeah. And those will knock you out.
Yeah. And I like those too. There was a big festival here in Chicago called FOBAB. And it's the largest barrel aged festival in North America, maybe the world. And it's gigantic. There's like 300 breweries and they all have to bring a barrel aged beer on board or 2. Mm-hmm. And it's just one of those things like you better have a sandwich in your stomach or some pancakes on the way there. Nice base started.
How do you afford this rock and roll lifestyle?
Rock and roll. I must have missed the part where you confused me with Tommy Lee and
or at least it's a line from a
Molly Crew in 1988. I don't know.
Well, I'm not saying that you're tearing up hotel rooms, but I am saying that you were always out and about. And I realize you're getting some freebies because of these publications.
The way they look at it is getting media invitations where they might invite me and my family or me and a few friends. And for the cost of 4 tickets, they know I'm going to write about it in publications and blogs, blast it out on social media. And the idea for them, it's no big deal to provide a few tickets here and there. So there are some definite perks. I wouldn't recommend anybody getting into the publishing industry for this sole reason of looking for perks, but it is nice, especially I think that's why certain friends of mine even text or email me from time to time is, hey, what's going on? You got anything going on? But it's a fun aspect of it for sure. People are always asking your opinions on restaurants and breweries and museum exhibits, and if it's worthwhile, or what have you heard? What's the latest scoop in this restaurant or this neighborhood or whatever? So a lot of research and things go into that. It just doesn't come naturally, but being in the loop is fun.
Okay, but I know a lot about you and how you approach finances. And there are these little micro decisions that you make that allow you to do more. And that's what I want to talk about, because you're going to go to perhaps a sporting event where you didn't get the free tickets, but you're not going to pick the most expensive seats because you want to be able to go do something else too. And you're fine with that. You're like, I want to go to the game, but I don't need to be in the front row. You find a way. So I want to talk more about that.
My family, we've always been travel bugs. My 8-year-old son has been to 15 states and I think 7 or 8 countries and counting. And that doesn't even really count much in the last couple of years, obviously.
Right.
I was hiking a glacier in Iceland and he was on my backpack. We had a little, kid. He was probably 3 or 4 at the time. We were putting on all the metal cleats to walk up the ice. And I said, has anybody ever taken their kid on one of these? He goes, yeah, probably not, but there's a first time for everything. I said, let's go. And one of my greatest photos of all time is I took a selfie with him on the back and he's all bundled up and giving me the thumbs up.
Right. But Iceland's expensive.
Yes.
It is so expensive to get to. It's so expensive there. I've heard about like $20 hamburgers and that kind of thing.
Accurate.
Yeah. So how did you manage Iceland?
We flew in on WOW Airlines, found a really good deal, and we had to do where it was set up was a layover in Reykjavik, and they were banking on everybody else continuing on and flying to Europe. We found this article where all of a sudden we could fly to Iceland, and we'd been to Europe. We were like, no, London and Barcelona could wait. We're going to stay over in Iceland. And all they wanted people to do was stay over for a day or two, spend money in Iceland, do a couple little touristy things, then hop back on and go to Paris for the week.
Right.
But when we landed in Reykjavik, we knew about the pricing, and it took one night. It was my family and another couple. There's 5 of us. And the first night out, we had a $27 hamburger. It was astronomical, and it wasn't anything fancy. It was incredibly expensive because they know if you're there, they've got you. And Iceland was fantastic. People were nice. The best Wi-Fi in the history of mankind in any country I've ever been. We were in the middle of the country. It looked like a combination of Mars and Nebraska. And there's nothing around us for dozens and dozens of miles. And we had perfect Wi-Fi in the car. People were in the back writing emails, like work emails. But we went to the grocery store and we stocked up, and we had an apartment for 2 or 3 days in Reykjavik before we moved on. And we ate at home, and we bought like a $10 or $12 bottle of wine. And we would still go out and see the sights. But unless you're into smoked fish, Icelandic food isn't world renowned.
Don't they also have that rotten shark?
Rotten shark, yes. Fermented. We call it fermented. It's not rotten. A lot of restaurants would be shaking there. No, but you shouldn't be eating shark anyway. But yeah, very interesting menus over there. But yeah, we saved a ton of money just by cooking in our house, and we could still go out for a few drinks or go out and explore, but it just saved more money for the tours and things like that.
Yeah,
so we were more interested in it. If we were in a country with incredible cuisine, we might not take quite as many steps to save money because that's part of the culture. But in Iceland, it's the volcanoes and it's the dramatic black sand beaches that's more eye-catching. And one other, Scott and Kurt, we went to Costa Rica many years ago, and we did a little research beforehand, and we parlayed our entire vacation around the first week of their rainy season, which means prices dropped by half price. And all the hotels and a lot of restaurants and different adventures. And so we were staying in this incredible eco-friendly hotel in the jungle. And it was like, it went from say $200 a night to $110 because it was the first week of rainy season. Well, if you've been to Costa Rica, there's not big of a difference between rainy season and non-rainy season. It's humid and hot and rainy anyway. But we took advantage of that. And I went from leaving a snowstorm at O'Hare Airport and landing, and we drove 2 hours. And next thing you know, I'm in a pool with college friends drinking beer and flipping peanuts to howler monkeys. that were coming out of the woods. I was like, wait a second. I was just at a desk at a football magazine in a snowstorm like
Uh-huh.
6 hours ago. And now I'm in a heated pool watching. Oh, I forgot about the volcano in Arnall. It's one of the most active volcanoes in the Western Hemisphere. And that volcano is erupting. And we're seeing lava run down the volcano, drinking beer, flipping peanuts to howler monkeys.
Oh, I love
And
it.
all because, and it was made available because, not made available, but made a little bit more enticing because everything was half price.
Tell me how you walk through the process of finding travel deals.
It starts with a little bit of research. We belong to a lot of different emails. There are a couple I recommend would be Matador Network is a great place for information. They send a lot of people out to gather some really good research and focus in on what's important about different locales and different things that they're writing about. It's really been good for us. Scott's Cheap Flights is a member service. You can do it for free and you can also pay for an upgrade. And they bring all kinds of very affordable flights from everywhere from Malaysia to Phoenix and really kind of get out there and do a lot of the work for you, which is nice. And for the better part of 2 decades, I've belonged to Kayak and Orbits and Travel Zoo has been a good one too. Cater to your trip to what you want, right? There's so many different package deals you can get where it saves you hundreds and hundreds of dollars to package a flight and a hotel and maybe even a car rental. But if you're also going completely solo, my family's always been one that we don't mind skimping on the flight or the rental car just to have more funds to spend when we get there. I'd rather have a really good meal or a really good museum or tour experience when we get to where we're going as opposed to what we're flying on. That doesn't matter to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I should own stock in Spirit Airlines. Funny little tidbit about one of the recent times I flew Spirit and we all boarded and the flight attendant said, "Hey, everyone, for those of you who have never flown with us, enjoy our trip to New York City. And we're really excited to have you aboard Spirit. And for those who swore that they'd never fly Spirit again, welcome back." And everybody just kind of stopped and laughed. And you could see everybody does this, knowing nod. They all kind of look at each other. Yeah, that's me. That's me. And that was probably about 50% of the plane. They were like, "Oh, I'm never flying Spirit again." And guess what? For $55 to Denver, you're back on.
One of my friends, Gerard, just flew down from Cleveland to visit me. And he said, "I flew Frontier. I swore I'd never fly on them, but it was the best price. So here I am, rolling the dice, flying on Frontier."
I regularly fly a lot of round trips, a little bit different now with gas prices and things like that. But I could tell you some major cities, everything from LaGuardia to Fort Lauderdale to Denver, and it's under $100 round trip.
Mm-hmm.
And we are dealing with a $200 ski pass to Vail. It's like, well, wait a second. Here's an extra $140 I have to spend. That's an extra day of skiing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. And we've even done, we're not embarrassed to say, we've done picnic lunches at Disney.
Mm-hmm.
When you're spending hundreds of dollars just to get into Disney and experience as much as you can, why stop at a restaurant for an hour and 30 minutes and spend an additional $120 when you can pack lunches and spend 15 minutes eating and then get back on the rides and really experience the theme park to the max?
You take the time to think about that. And I don't. And I know I need to do a better job of that. And I remember going to a street festival with you in Chicago.
Oh.
It was like some block party with you in Chicago. And I wanted a beer. And there was a vendor selling beers and they were like $10. And it was just sort of crappy beer. And I stood in line and you marched over to a store and came out with a 6-pack that cost less than the one beer that I was buying. And I just don't take the time to think about it. Like, I want a beer. They're selling beer. It sucks. It's $10. I'm still going to pay it because I'm here. Whereas you're taking the time to say, all right, there's a way around this. And that is why you have more money in your pocket than I do.
we would actually, now in fairness, we would pay for that first beer to have the cup in our hand. There's the trick. So as long as you have the cup and it looks like it's legitimate, and there's all these great beer stores, and we would come out with craft beer and like a case of beer. And, there was a couple of us that would do it. And then our other group of friends would make fun of us initially.
Uh-huh.
And we would form this circle. Everybody would be talking, "Hey, Trent, can I grab one of those beers?" "Well, yeah, you can. Go ahead." And sure enough, it was a case of beer and it went, it goes a long way. And that sounds incredibly frugal, but it just, it makes the day last longer. And we're not afraid to buy a few $8 and $9, $10 beers, but why do it when you can have, and it's illegal in a Chicago festival to be walking around with an open container. So it's like, it's no different.
Right. Yeah. You're taking the time to think that through, and then that allows you to have more fun.
Yeah. And we can go out after the festival.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are the expert in all things Chicago. So let's say I'm in the city by myself for about 12 hours of free time and I have $100 to spend in the city. Can you map out a perfect itinerary for me?
Sure. I would do it in the summer. Or I love Chicago. I would put it up against any big city in the world. We're consistently voted among the best cities, if not the best big city in the world. But if you're not accustomed to the climate, December, January, and February can be rather unfriendly to those who, especially for those who like to get out and about. Having said that, there's enough here for anybody to appreciate for sure. But I would recommend coming when it's warm. And number one is getting out on the lake. Lake Michigan is incredibly beautiful and clean. It actually has this aqua color. It almost feels like you're in the Caribbean. But there's so many activities, especially on the lake. Millennium Park for sure is free. Lincoln Park Zoo is free. A lot of times in the summer, some of the best museums in the world are in Chicago. The Art Institute, the Field Museum, Museum of Science and Industry, Shedd Aquarium, Adler Planetarium are the big five. And a lot of them have various deals, both for families, deals on different days where it's even free to get in from, say, 5 to 8 p.m. And go exploring. One of my favorite things to do when guests come in, and it's just an easy way to see the city, see the beauty of the city, and the architecture, and see the city from all angles, is an architecture cruise. And they usually range about $40, I would say. You can do everything from like a historical architecture cruise. Sometimes they have some that are sunset happy hours. The Chicago Architecture Foundation has a boat called Chicago's First Lady that's really popular. And then the other one that's really big is shoreline sightseeing. And you can't go wrong with either one of them. And they leave from the Chicago River or even Navy Pier, and they're 75 minutes long or so, but they go all the way down the river. And I'm not an architecture guy whatsoever, but they tell enough history, enough interesting little aspects of the buildings that were built, a lot of fun tidbits that you can go home and share with people. It's definitely one of the top things to do when visiting Chicago for sure. The Chicago River Walk, it was built about, I would say about 5 or 6 years ago. It's like a 1.5 mile walkway right alongside the river. It kind of provides a unique perspective because you're below traffic, kind of looking up at all this great architecture, but you're right at water level and the boats are cruising by. And there's probably about a dozen restaurants and bars down there, ice cream shops, live music. You'll walk by people playing acoustic guitar in these bars, and each one has its own personality. And rooftops, if you can get up to the rooftop and have a cocktail or two. Cindy's is probably my favorite. It's on top of the Chicago Athletic Association Hotel. Provides the best view for sure. It's on top of, basically overlooking Millennium Park and Lake Michigan and Michigan Avenue. And it's really neat. And when it's cool out, they put fire pits out and really good food as well. And it seems like most of the rooftops, the best rooftops, in my opinion, are on top of hotels, but you don't have to be staying there. You just go make reservations, go grab a drink, and before dinner somewhere else. The London House Hotel has a kind of a unique angle down the river. It's really beautiful. IO is another one on top of the Godfrey Hotel. And Jay Parker is in Lincoln Park on the Hotel Lincoln, and overlooks massive Lincoln Park and the zoo and everything like that. It's a little bit different. It's up north a little bit, but it's beautiful as well. Navy Pier has undergone a transformation in the last few years. They've spent millions renovating it and bringing it up to speed. It was always one of those types of places, a little bit cheesy, a little bit tourist. And if you were ever caught there by one of your friends, you'd kind of be hiding, behind, no, it's not me at Navy Pier. You're ducking behind some, walls and things like that. But it's not that way anymore. They've really invested a lot and made some really nice shopping experiences, a lot of restaurants and beer gardens down there now. And a lot of the boat cruises leave from Navy Pier. And there's a really neat rooftop restaurant called Offshore at the end of Navy Pier. That's fantastic too.
Great. And then best place to catch some blues. Love Kingston Mines.
Yeah,
and the tickets are fairly inexpensive and they're up late.
They are up till 5 a.m. Kingston Mines. Kingston Mines is a little, I don't know how old it is, but there's a story behind how many people have played there. King has sat in, the Rolling Stones have played on stage back in like the 60s and 70s. And it's a tiny little place in Lincoln Park, but it's got a ton of history to it, and actually really good barbecue as well, if that interests you. But Buddy Guy's Legends is a famous joint that's in the Loop. toward the South Loop of downtown. And it brings in people from all over the world, really, to get a taste of true Chicago blues and Southern blues.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah. Chicago is such a restaurant city and food centric, and it really has developed a solid, better than solid reputation around the world, and not just the United States, for being just a fantastic restaurant city. You can get anything you want here. We have smaller restaurants that have really done well and earned awards. And then we have the giant TV personalities and restaurant groups that are doing extremely well to boot. So I would say you have to save something for a decent restaurant. And I would say the last thing would be to save money for one of three things. If you have $100, you probably won't be able to do all three, but a beef sandwich, deep dish pizza, or a steak at one of our acclaimed many steakhouses.
So the beef sandwich from Portillo's, or where do you?
No. I like Portillo's. I don't want to think about Portillo's, but I would say Mr. Beef on Orleans. Make sure to get the jardiniere, crunchy, spicy jardiniere on there.
Okay.
And they have a couple of different ways they can serve it. They serve it dry. Then they can pour a little bit of the au jus, well, we call it au jus, but beef sauce on it, the broth. Or they take the entire thing with tongs and just dip it in the whole, and it comes out, and they wrap it twice and make sure it stays off your white shirt.
Where is the best pizza in Chicago?
A loaded question, but if you ask a lot of locals and locals who have lived here for quite some time, I think the predominant answer would be a place called Pequod's. And it is in Lincoln Park neighborhood in Chicago, a tiny little place. I wouldn't call it a hole in the wall, but it's kind of a bar that serves pizza, and it's deep dish. And you have to prepare to wait about 45 to 50 minutes for it to cook. And the glorious part of it is that they actually kind of crisp, almost burn the top of it just a little bit to make a nice little crispy crust. And buttery crust. It's fantastic. And Giordano's, Gino's East, and Lou Malnati's are kind of bigger brand names, and those are very good as well. But if you want good old fashioned homespun Chicago pizza that's very, very unique, it's all about Pequod's.
Well, you took me to Pequod's once. I thought it was delicious.
It is fantastic. And I remember that I think you were going back to your hotel, and I went back to my apartment, and I remembered I had the leftovers. I don't know if you were flying out the next day or something, but you are the first person in history ever to turn down leftovers from Pequod's. So I willingly and gladly took them, and I left them in the back seat of my car. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night. I think I had a nightmare that I left Pequod's pizza in my car, but I walked out at 3-4 in the morning and retrieved it and put it in my fridge. So it's worth a block and a half walk to your car sometimes.
Well, it was snowing too.
Absolutely.
I mean, you walked out in treacherous weather to get that pizza. I remember you telling me about that.
It's pajama in the snow kind of walk worthy for sure.
Yeah, it is super good. However, I don't think they do a good job shipping it. Whereas Lou Malnati's, they have that process down. I've ordered pizza from them, which I don't like as much as Pequod's, but they just know how to ship it in hot, sticky, humid Florida in the middle of the summer, and it still shows
works.
up perfect. Yeah, they're great for that, for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, there's two Pequod's locations, one's in the suburbs, but when you're in a battle with those big corporate types and they do it well, and they know that people around the country have had it before, and they want it to share with somebody for a birthday or something else, they'll ship it out, and it usually arrives pretty well.
It's time for the pet peeve segment. Everyone has those little things that annoy them, but we rarely mention them when we get to know someone. What are your pet peeves?
I'll start with Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas in Starbucks on November 1st. That would be an easy one. I heard that again.
Is it because it's November 1st, or is it because it's Mariah Carey?
It's because it's November 1st first, and then because it's Mariah Carey second, and then third, it's because every third song is Mariah Carey in Starbucks right now. That's a beautiful voice, but I don't need to hear it. It was Halloween yesterday. I'm good for a while. I went down to Florida with my dad for a few days, and I forgot how much I hate when people jump up right when the seatbelt ding goes off. The plane taxis, it stops and that little ding goes off, and people just jump up as if they've got $10,000 dropping out of the sky. and they grab their bag and then, oh, I'm going to be the first one to scurry and grab my carry-on and get it out of the top. And then you stand there and wait for 14 minutes staring at each other. And it's just like, I'd rather finish my magazine article or finish my drink or whatever and talk to the person next to you. And I just don't see the big rush with that. The other one that popped up actually this weekend as well is like I call them late mergers. And that has nothing to do with Gordon Gekko and Wall Street. The people, everybody knows them, that wait until the very end to sneak in when you merge in traffic. And I just do everything I can to cut them off safely. Kind of creep up and keep them from where they want to go because they're more important than the rest of us.
Someone told me that's actually the correct way to do it. It's supposed to go at the last minute, that's the way it's designed. That's what someone told me. I always thought as early as possible, you should be merging into traffic. But apparently you're supposed to wait until the absolute end of the line. And that's when you're supposed to go in. I
say merge when it's polite, because if you start the process early and you don't get in until the end, that's fine. But if you can see that you're gunning it toward that last little, where the width of the merge lane is skinnier than the width of your car, that's a problem.
Yeah, I know. It seems rude. Okay, so with groceries, do you think that the person who has put all their groceries on the belt should put the little bar behind their groceries? Or is it the responsibility of the next person showing up to put the little divider between the first person's groceries and theirs?
I've done both, but I would say it's definitely the responsibility of the person who's checking out.
The first person who's checking out.
It's kind of like holding the door for somebody when they're behind you. People that don't take chances once in a while, like they're a little too, that's maybe not a true pet peeve, but like, I remember I was talking to my 8-year-old, and I'm not using him as an example necessarily, but we were trying to get him to try something that we had made for dinner. And it was important that he eat it because we didn't really have any option B or option C. And I said, just try it, see what you think. If you don't like it, we'll figure something else out. And I looked at him and I said, hey, I'm not going to make you try anything that I don't think you're going to like. And he kind of looked at me and he got it and he took a bite and I got the thumbs up of approval. And that's just a little example. I think there's so many, even people I know or friends of mine, that they get a little too set in their ways. And just, I think life could bring them so much more joy and adventure if they just took a few chances and got out there. And whether it's, you name it, traveling, dating, moving on to that job. And I know with your background, I was always proud of you moving out from the corporate world and where things weren't quite what they were made out to be. And you've created this whole business and wonderful persona and podcasting life for yourself. So,
thank you so much. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to take a chance.
That's the biggest thing. Take a chance once in a while. I mean, there's something to be said about people who take too many chances and they come out guns blazing like the 2 holsters in the Wild West. But gosh, you got to try, even if it's a little pipe dream. I mean, that's going back to the Illinois Brewing Magazine. It's like there wouldn't be any of these breweries if people didn't take a chance. They're, making beer in their garage and their cousin comes over and says, hey, this is really good. And they have nothing. They have this little homemade kit in their garage. And all of a sudden now they're, the 5th biggest brewery in Illinois or whatever. If it's within your realm and where you are in life, take a chance.
Yeah.
Get out there.
That's a good segue into the fear segment.
What were you afraid of as a child? And what are you afraid of now?
Do you remember the show Unsolved Mysteries?
Yeah.
And that guy's creepy, what was his name? The actor. And he had this voice. And just as soon as his voice came on and they had that weird music to start, and I was probably in like 4th or 5th grade. And my brother either had like sports practice or confirmation for our Lutheran upbringing. And so I was home alone on Wednesday nights. And I was old enough to be home alone, so that's not a concern. But Unsolved Mysteries would come on. And I knew like my brother would be home at like, say, 7:50. Unsolved Mysteries came on at 7. So I had 50 minutes to watch it alone. I was addicted to it. So I had 50 minutes and I was like, wait a second. It was dark out. And I would actually, I'm not kidding, Deedre, I would turn my family's couch, so that nobody could look in from the front door and see me. And I would sit in front of the couch, kind of head down. And it was just me and the TV. And it's like, if anybody was looking in the door, or like this guy that was wanted for a double murder or the UFO sighting, whatever, nobody could see me. And at 7:48, as I heard the garage door go up, I would hurry up and push the couch back, flip the lights back on. And so nobody knew I was scared of unsolved mysteries.
Oh, that's adorable.
It looked like I was just sitting there, watching TV instead. But it was one of those addictive things where I loved it and it scared me. And I think I liked it more because there was so many cool stories and it scared the living crap out of me. But I would say the other thing that comes to mind is having my blood drawn. When I was a kid, I almost used to pass out and they would do that little prick of the finger and that still got me. And to this day, I look away. My son, he's like, he has to come with me to a physical or something. He goes, Dad, here it comes. Here comes a needle. And I'm like, dude, don't tell me that. And I'm looking at looking at the wall, and the nurse is coming in and he says, here it comes. Get ready. I was like, buddy, don't tell me. It's supposed to, it still bothers me. And he looks right at it, doesn't faze him. So
wow,
glad it didn't get passed down to him because that's still a fear.
Oh, he's tough. I'm still afraid of needles. And in fact, when I went to get the inoculation, the one for COVID, and I looked away just like you did, right? Yeah. So I looked away. I didn't want to see when the needle was coming into my arm, and they shot me up with air. These were blank syringes, and they did it to all these people because everyone looked away. This was at the CVS pharmacy. So teach me to go to CVS. Yeah. And so several days later, we get a call saying, we didn't actually give you the vaccine. We just shot you with air. I said, but my arm hurts. Like, yeah, when you put air into a muscle, it'll hurt.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Did you start floating away like the parade in New York City, like the Thanksgiving Day parade?
So the thing is, if you put air into a vein, it'll kill you.
Yeah.
They put air into a muscle, so it hurt. So it felt like, oh yeah, I definitely got a shot. But that whole looking away thing is not good for you. You need to look and you need to make sure they're actually injecting you with something.
Be glad it wasn't like an IV that they inject you with air. That would be more problematic.
Yeah.
At least they came back and told you, though. I mean, think about if they.
And then they gave me my card that looked like this was a legit vaccine, right? It's not like they were going to track me down later and say, let's take that card away or anything.
Man, next time, just tell them you'll get air at the next time you get your car serviced. If you got any more, pump you up.
Right? Yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh, that's awful. Yeah. It's always been a fear. What's weird is that I can watch the surgery channel. I can watch open heart surgery on TV, but if it comes near me, or if I'm like physically in the room, if, family member or whatever is getting an IV taken out, I got to look the other way, pick something on the wall and wait for it to be over. Yeah, it's interesting.
The other thing I'm afraid of is, let's say I hear a noise and I go to look out the window and I'm always petrified there's going to be eyes right there looking in the window.
And they're orange.
Level with my eyes. Yeah. Like that's just terrifying to me. So anytime that happens in a scary movie, like I know it's going to happen. I'm like, there's going to be eyes. There's going to be eyes. I know it, and I scream every time.
That's a good one.
Rounding this out on a positive note, what are you looking forward to in the future?
Getting back to global traveling, I think the last couple of years with COVID, we've done these like quick hitting jaunts. We have a good friend who has moved to Thailand recently, and she's begging us to come. And so we've got kind of Southeast Asia on the list and Scotland. And we've got a nice little curated list of places that we definitely want to hit in the next year or two. So that idea of just really global exploring and, planning out a 2-week trip and really kind of, and writing about it too, because I do some freelance travel writing, and that's always a lot of fun because so many, especially tours, they're really interested in getting you on board to talk about their tours and what they offer. And just projects. I've got a lot of untapped projects, or just projects that need to be dusted off and, put the finishing touches on them. I've got like a couple screenplays that are half done. I need to find an illustrator for a couple of children's books I've written.
No, you don't. You can use AI to draw everything.
I know, but if you see, I know. That's one of those things where like, either that or bring AI in and, make my stick figures look so much better than they really are.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to start I have a couple websites, domains that I own that I'd like to, turn into kind of a travel blog or an experiential travel writing site that allows people to come in and share their own opinions on places they've been, things they've done.
And now it's time for the very interesting game show. This isn't trivia. Throw accuracy out the window and give me your most ridiculous and creative answers instead. And let's see if you can come up with the most interesting answer. Are you ready?
So this first question was written pretty much by my husband a few days ago, and I don't even really think it's original. I'm pretty sure we could find it on a t-shirt or a meme somewhere. Rick Astley would never give you up, but what has he given up?
His pride.
I
don't know. No, that's not fair. That's not fair. Because I love the 80s.
Next up, this is a new question, and I wrote it last week, and I've only heard one answer so far.
Okay.
You ready? Rats succumb to peer pressure. What do you think teenage rats dare each other to do?
Touch the electrical current on the New York City subway. We were just in New York visiting my nieces a few weekends ago, and love exploring the city. One of the biggest things we get a kick out of, we could be in Central Park, we could be looking up at the Empire State Building, on a ferry, going down the Hudson, whatever. But watching rats race each other in the subway down on the tracks is fascinating. But yeah, I would see they, like maybe try and gauge and see if they can get one of them to touch the electric current and see what happens.
Okay. Now, I have heard two answers to this next question. It's also fairly new. And let's see if you can come up with a different answer. It was recently discovered that picking one's nose could lead to Alzheimer's. What could picking a wedgie lead to? And the other answers I've heard involve the other answer.
Oh boy.
The other answer. All right. So the other answers I've heard involve butts, and I'm just saying no butt stuff. Let's see if you can come up with something that doesn't involve. Yeah, no.
Or you're just tired of talking about butts.
It doesn't have to be PG-13. I just want to hear something that doesn't involve butts. I know I say picking a wedgie, but let's see if you can come up with something unrelated to the butt.
How about picking a wedgie would lead to infinite wisdom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, there you go.
Or like the ability to
that's
tell.
a smart guy. Look at him.
Yeah.
Look at him pick.
The ability to tell when people are lying. The more you go after the wedgie, the more you can gives you the power to tell when people aren't telling I don't know. I'm stretching a little bit probably.
I know it's your answer. Go as far as you want. So picking a wedgie allows you to determine if someone's lying to you.
Sure.
Yeah.
It'd be a good superpower to have.
It's interesting you say that. I'm going to have an expert in lying, like a lie detector, like a human lie detector. Excellent. Yeah. That's a goal anyway. See if I can get him on the show.
Are you going to be the subject? Are you going to be hooked up to anything?
No, it's not with a polygraph. Like he's able to look at people's faces and tell like by their eyebrow shape, if they're a risk taker, if they're an honest person. That whole expression, that person has an honest face. That's that's a legit thing.
What if you just had your eyebrows done and you had that little...
Yeah, you got to be careful that you don't get the lying arch.
Yeah, right.
You think you're all sexy and now no one trusts you because of your eyebrow waxing. Mm-hmm. All right. I wrote this one last night. Scientists think that they may have found the fifth dimension. What is in it?
Even more awful reality TV.
Oh, no.
There's no limit to what's out there and what's the Dr. Pimple Poppers and I know people, I won't mention who they are, who watch religiously the 90 Day Fiance, Sister Wives, things like that. Doesn't matter what time of day, you can find it. It's out there for you. I get it though. You get away from your life and your stress, and it's like, put me in front of something that entertains me and I don't have to think. So maybe it's not an awful thing.
All right. So I wrote this card for you since you are so much into beer. So women were the original brewers of beer going back thousands of years, yet men consume 3 times more beer than women do today. Why?
Because we have to deal with women. Oh, no. Hold on. No,
that's so wrong.
Needle on the record. Hold on. No, all kidding aside, I would say that maybe it's because women have more taste than men. How about that as a comeback?
Oh,
more substance, more style.
And for the last question of the D, which is asked at the end of every episode, what should have been invented by now?
Social media alerts. How does that sound? Like a social media alert. So it sets off an alarm at 1 a.m. and maybe you've had like 6 or 7 drinks, you get home and it says, "Are you sure that you want to send this?" And it tells you a voice, like a Darth Vader type voice. And, is challenging your cousin's political discourse really worth your time at 1 a.m.? And what are the ramifications? And it's kind of like a big alert, but then you hear Darth Vader's voice telling you, yeah, maybe you shouldn't send this tweet, or maybe you shouldn't respond, comment on Facebook. And it stops you from kind of like, the embarrassing thing you'd rather regret.
I like that idea, and I want to add to it. I think if you're going to go out for the night for drinking, you should alert your phone that you're going to be socializing, that there will be alcohol, and it holds all communication in a holding pen that can only be released the next morning after you review and definitely approve for it to go out. That's text messages, emails, comments on social media, all of that. It's just in a holding pen of some sort.
Imagine like a farm and there's just a bunch of sheep in it. You wake up and like, oh, those sheep are my, the football bet I was going to put in, or that text I was going to send, or the comment on Facebook.
Even like a purchase or whatever, all of that.
That takes my idea the next level. That takes it right. That's Shark Tank waiting to happen.
I think that's a multi-billion-dollar idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to come up with a name with it, though. A name for it.
It's some sort of holding pen. It's a holding cell. It says you're too drunk to interact with society. We're just putting you in this pen for a while.
Isolationism.
Yes. It's an isolation tank of sorts. It's a communication isolation tank. Like you could put anything and you wanted to add in there so that you're not doing a lot of online shopping or what have you.
It doesn't let you get on Grindr or Amazon or anything else of that nature.
Great.
It just takes like 100 websites and just shuts them down for 6 hours. Twitter.
Like you're only allowed to use Uber when you're drinking. That's about it. You don't have access to anything else.
Uber and the Weather Channel. That'd be it.
Yep. Well, thanks, Trent. How can folks get in touch with you?
Yes, illinoisbrewing.com. And if you happen to be in the Chicago suburbs, therealparkridge.com, but Trent at illinoisbrewing.com. And we're looking at expanding, but if there's any illustrators out there who love the idea of children's books, love to chat with you.
I know a couple of people who have put together some children's books, so
Wonderful.
We could reach out to their illustrators. Yeah. Do you have any other last words of advice to the listeners about incorporating more travel into their lives without breaking the bank?
Going back to taking chances, there's a big, beautiful world out there. And I feel like we've just kind of scratched the surface of things. My parents have like a little saying on the wall at the house I grew up in. And it's always been like simple and poignant and kind of words to live by without sounding too preachy. But it says, never get so busy making a living that you forget to make a life.
I like that.
I don't know who said it, but it's up on the wall. And it's like every time we'd walk out of the house, we'd see that. And it's that work-life balance, of course, that everybody's reaching for. But I think it's so important nowadays with how fast things are and how quick information gets out there and how busy schedules are. There's time to sit back and have an interesting conversation, right? And have grab that buttery Chardonnay or the IPA or whatever, and just enjoy life, enjoy the people around you, and try to keep yourself healthy and entertained.
Well, thanks a lot, Trent.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun. You're doing a great job with this. This is cool. One of the most interesting conversationalists out there.
Aw, I really appreciate it. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Until next time, be interesting. Tell everyone the story about the time you went on a trip with your wife, but you didn't have a hotel ready when you got there.
Oh, how do you remember that? That's digging deep in the archives. I got to make sure she doesn't listen to this because that's going to bring back some memories. Our first honeymoon was in New England, but it wasn't officially a honeymoon until she left the country. So about a year or two later, we saved up and went to South America, and she took care of the flights. I had to take care of the hotels and accommodations, and I knocked everything out. We were going to go to Chile, and I got an Airbnb in Buenos Aires, and which was like $42 a night, by the way. Airbnb was like just starting off, and it was a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Buenos Aires, and it was like $42 a night, and it blew my mind. But I realized that there was one night where I didn't have accommodations, and it was in Mendoza in wine country. And I had searched and searched, but it was Easter weekend. Argentina being a heavily Catholic country, a lot of people were off, a lot of people were traveling for the weekend, and all the hotels I was looking at were booked. I had a hotel for Saturday night, but not Friday. Couldn't find anything. Didn't tell her. We get on the train, and we're on the train going from Buenos Aires into wine country through the mountains. I had emailed the owner, and he was a British expat. He traveled to Argentina, fell in love, never left, opened this hostel. It was a cross between a hotel and a hostel. Excuse me. And he opened this with his wife and never left and loved it. So he knew we were staying Saturday. And I emailed him and I said, hey, I've got this big favor to ask. We don't have a place to stay. It's okay for me. I can sleep on a floor, but it's probably not going to be okay for my wife. We just got married. So anything you can do to help would be fantastic. And he wrote back, he's like, I'll take care of it. He says, we might have a futon for you, but your wife will definitely have a bed. And I said, well, who else is going to be in that bed? We're on our honeymoon. I was like, who else is there going to be? Franco from Italy there, or a group of college kids? I don't know. So we got off the train and we're literally pulling our bags through the street and walking to this hostel. And she says, where are we staying? I said, well, that's a good question. I said, we're staying here. And she's like, you didn't get accommodations. I said, well, we did. And so we walk in. I'm explaining this to her when we're 25 feet from the door. Luckily, this wonderful man shows up. He knows we're walking up. He opens the door and says, you must be Trent and Debbie. I said, yes. And he says, I'll tell you what, come on in. I'm going to get you checked in. Here's a bottle of wine on me, and I'll give me 5 minutes and I'll show you around. And he was so nice and so accommodating. It was super friendly. And it was a half hostel. I wish I could remember the name of it because I would totally give him props. But it was a half hostel, half hotel. And so my wife ended up sleeping in a room that had about 10 bunk beds. And a lot of other people, she had the lower bunk for one night with, say, I don't know, maybe 16 or 18 people she didn't know. Meanwhile, I had to fight his dog for a futon, his giant like golden retriever.
And this is your honeymoon.
This is our honeymoon, probably day 5 of our honeymoon.
Uh-huh.
But the good part is he started us off. He said, leave your bags. He goes, I got you booked on a first wine tasting. He says, there's 4 or 5 other people from here that are going. Off you go. Don't worry about a thing. And as we're walking out, she turns to me and she says, not really happy about this, but this guy's fantastic. And let's go drink some wine. And I went, okay. And she did say the sheets smell clean. I was like, okay, good.
And then he moved you into a hotel room.
Yes, then we had our own room. We had our own room the next night. But if it weren't for him, I would have been in trouble, and more trouble than I already was. But the Mendoza has a way to relieve a lot of stress. It's just gorgeous countryside and wine and great wine. And so that helped too. But yeah, anybody out there who's planning their honeymoon, be careful of Catholic holidays and always book well in advance and make sure there's no bunk beds on your honeymoon.
Exactly. Yeah.
Easier said than done sometimes.